Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky J. It's the Jack Slack podcast coming at you on the 7th of April. And it's a midweek podcast because, if I'm honest, I spent the weekend eating children's chocolate eggs. And Monday I felt like absolute shit. Also, it was a bank holiday here, so I gave myself the day off. And then Tuesday I was like, oh, what is there to talk about? And I'm sort of in the same situation today because there are fights. They're just sort of okay, is how I describe it. We had a Bellator last weekend, and I was sort of let down by the fact that literally any time I put Bellator in a title for a podcast, it gets about half as many listens. And it gets less listens than when I just put Q&A or filler episode. So, while I keep seeing these things being like, everyone's talking about Patricio Pitbull, Bellator really is surging up as the number 2 promotion. My personal experience is that no, people don't give a shit. But I did watch the Bellator last weekend, and I won some money on it because that's the only thing I bet on now. That and women's fights going the distance. What did I bet on? I bet on all the favourites, as I told you last week. It was a toss-up between Neyman and Jason Jackson. A lot of people felt like Jason Jackson shouldn't have won, but he did. And that blew my... No, him and the lass I said looked like she probably would win, Kana Watanabe, beat Alejandra Lara, which blew the all-in-on Coca accumulator for me. But I did also have a separate bet on Kana Watanabe and a separate double on Watanabe and Jason Jackson because I thought they were the most likely to blow it, or rather win when they shouldn't have. So I ended up winning money, which was good. I mean, it's quite hard to lose money on Bellator. Like, as I told you, absolute sure thing with Magomedov versus CJ Hamilton, and Usman Nurmagomedov versus Mike Hamill, and those turned out absolutely certain. Next week we've got Liz Carmouche and Julia Budd getting basically stepping stone fights, and if you do a double on them, you can get. I got 99p to the pound, so you can almost. So you can make some pretty decent money on fights that are supposed to be. As close as rigged as you can get without actually rigging them. But the Bellator event was all right overall. I mean, people tuned in, apparently. Patricio Pitbull scored another impressive victory over, again, not a super impressive opponent, Emmanuel Sanchez. They had a decent fight the first time round, but for the people who are like, Patricio Pitbull is the pound-for-pound best on earth, and there are people now who are like, oh, he would walk through Alexander Volkanovski or Max Holloway. And I think there's a lot of... people are biased by the fact that they've seen those two guys lose, or, you've seen Volkanovski struggle with Max Holloway. But the reason that you've seen those guys struggle is because they're fighting really, really good competition all the time, whereas Patricio Pitbull is fighting lesser competition all the time. We talk about it quite a lot, but Bellator has about 10% of the best fighters in the world, with the UFC having like 80. But like 90% of Bellator's matches are mismatches as a result. But Pitbull looked good. Emmanuel Sanchez was trying to step up kicks again, as we talked about last time. And Patricio Pitbull timed him with those karate steps up the middle. Think Rob Whittaker, think Koji Horiguchi. You step up with the Sen no Sen counter, intercepting as they step up to kick. And he tried one, missed it, or thought better of it. He tried with the right hand and pulled away. And then he tried it with the left hook and knocked Emmanuel Sanchez down, jumped on an arm in guillotine, choked him out. Referee was like, I'm not sure, I'm going to need some more time to work this out. And stood there like, in pro wrestling where they pick your hand up and let it fall down 3 times, and on the last one you pick it up and clench your fist and hulk up. It was like that. He was just, I'm not quite certain he's unconscious yet. Not an awful lot I really want to talk about from that card otherwise. Tyrone Fortune won the gimme that he was supposed to win already. He fought Jack May already, and was that no contest? He blew it somehow. But, just sort of got on top of him and slowly patted him with punches, and the referee took forever to stop it. But it wasn't impressive. It wasn't... It was watching a big guy pity-patter a dude. It wasn't like, Brock Lesnar, Frank Mir 2. But I suppose the big news was that my boy Mauro is in the booth, and they cut Mike Goldberg. And for all the people who were like, Bellator treats fighters well, Bellator treats people well, blah, 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 Scott Coker's a good guy, and were mad about the UFC for dropping Goldberg so unceremoniously, Bellator did exactly the same thing. In fact, maybe even worse, because it seemed like, if you look at Mike Goldberg's tweets, he seems to think up to the night before the fights that he's commentating. And then they just announced on the night of the fights that he wasn't. Now, I've been complaining about the Bellator booth forever. I mean, it's pretty much certain at this point that Scott Coker listens to me. I knew back from Fightland when we talked to Bellator about using some gifts of their fights. They were like, we don't like how he talks about Scott Coker. So, we know that they listen. But the man is stealing all my ideas. Come on. No, honestly, I don't want people to lose their jobs. Like, that's not what I'm doing here. I'm just saying that Goldberg was a crap commentator, and so is Big John. I feel like I suggested ways of making them better, like bring in a third person to keep them on track. They tried that with Josh Thompson. Didn't really work that well. Mike Goldberg had been phoning it in for a long old time. He started 20 years ago, and he just got worse from then. I hope Bare Knuckle Boxing or some meme company picks him up and gives him a job. But, I'm not going to miss him on the Bellator booth. With that being said, shout out to Goldie if he's listening. It sucks that they did you like that, man. And then they got 160,000 viewers on their Showtime debut. So, not amazing. Just more of Scott Coker running a promotion into the ground. It's been going on for 7 years. It's going to keep going on as we continue. But Scott, if you're stealing my ideas still, try resigning. Hand over the reins to Bjorn Rebney. So let's do some news before we talk about this weekend's fights. What's going on? Loads of girl fights announced. Aspen Ladd versus Macy Chiasson, which is two up-and-comers. Aspen Ladd, my girl, the one whose likeness they stole for The Last of Us 2 and then didn't pay for. Much like they stole, what's her name? Juno. They stole Juno's likeness for the first one and didn't pay her too. And then Macy Barber versus Miranda Maverick, which is really prospect versus prospect stuff because they were pushing Maverick really hard. Macy Barber, did she lose that last one against Alexa Grasso? But the best description of this on Reddit MMA is former hype train versus pending hype train. Couple of more interesting announcements. For June, so we're a little way out, but you got Korean Zombie's going to be fighting Dan Ige. Obviously, Ige coming off wickedly fast knockout of Gavin Tucker. Korean Zombie coming off strange-ass loss to Brian Ortega. That's happening in June 19th. Interesting fight. And then, to be honest, the grappling could be really... Actually, the banging could be really... All of it's going to be really fun. But in related news, the Ultimate Fighter not going to be Usman versus Masvidal, as it was originally thought 4 weeks ago. They're bringing it back with Alexander Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega, which I can see being crap, but never mind. It's been dead for 3 years. Can't get any deader. I was saying, if you're doing tough again, don't tie up title fights. Bring in people who can't, their fighting ability isn't going to sell a fight at this point, but they can have beef. So, Diego Sanchez versus Donald Cerrone, perfect example of that, because they're going to have the ex-Jackson Winklejohn beef. They're both weird, interesting characters. And then their fight's not actually going to be that great, but you could get people to care about it. And if you believe the coaching matters on tough, then yeah, they're probably both very experienced guys with a wealth of wisdom to impart. And you got Joshua Fabia on Diego's team being weird, which makes for great TV. Plus a great way to give it a little bit of extra pay to two guys who are on their way out. But that's just me having good ideas. The other one for June is Volkov versus Ghan. Pulled the trigger on that pretty quick. I did say the rest of the heavyweight division is just going to be sort of on hold while they work out what's going on with John Jones. Because if they can agree it, the John Jones thing is going to be, that's going to shut everything down for the next 6 months. If they can't, Derek Lewis is in position to steal that. But it's interesting because both of those guys are managed by the Kawas. So they have all the leverage in the world, and I still feel they're going to fuck it up. Which is... yeah, interesting. They just released the Venom kits, and they're the same as the Reebok kits, but with fangs on. And I was saying, if you're a fighter, fucking unionize. Fucking talk to your friends in the gym and get together and form a players' association. Talk to other people you've trained at other gyms, you know other fighters. Talk to other people in your division or around your division that you get along with, and fucking do something about it, because you're looking like a dorky-ass billboard and you're not being paid for it properly. But the problem is that they've all got managers, 60% of the people in the UFC are managed by either Ali Abdelaziz or the Kawas. And those guys could easily put enough pressure on the UFC to get fighters a host of benefits to get all the fighters a host of benefits, but they won't, because it looks better for everyone to be doing terribly and for them to be able to bring their clients small successes. So, if you're listening and you're a fighter, fucking unionize, and also don't tell Malkikawa or what's his idiot brother called, the one who was like saying the N-word as a white man is very brave, or Ali Abdulaziz. Don't tell him you're going to form a union. Don't tell him that you are thinking of doing a collective action. And for the regular listener, go check out the Venom kits. They're shit. And there's some other stuff like Tafik Mutsayev's coming back to Rising in June, which is good, because he's a very promising fighter. Absolutely ragdolled the worst Pitbull brother, and then had a ton of disputes with Rising over whether he was going to leave or not. Honestly, guy you'd love to see in the UFC or Bellator, but probably won't. And then the rest of the news this week was just John Jones and Derek Lewis. Alternately, one's going to fight in Ngannou, the other's going to fight in Ngannou. Nobody's offering anyone enough money. So let's talk about these fights this weekend. Start with the UFC, because that's the one that matters. But the main event, a very strange main event. I mean, it was a little bit strange when it was Darren Till versus Marvin Vettori, because Vittori's surging and Darren Till is not. But now, since Till injured his collarbone and is out, it's Marvin Vettori versus Kevin Holland, who, still a very good fighter, very good at coming in on short notice, but just coming off a very embarrassing loss where we all remembered, he's been taken down like 25 times in 7 fights in the UFC. And Derek Brunson just easily took him down and laid on him. But Vittori coming off that Jack Hermansson fight, I rewatched that this morning and I had a lot of fun. I didn't remember it being that fun at the time. I remember people being very hype on it, but I just didn't really... the pace was not as high as I thought people were advertising it as, and I was just sort of like, it's a bit, plodding. But yeah, I had good fun watching it today. Some cool stuff in that, lots of slipping to the outside of the opponent's rear hand and throwing the rear hand back. I'd say very physical performance from Vittori. It was one of the first fights where I really realised how massive he is. Firstly, capped delts. Number one measure of fighting potential. As Gleison Tebow showed, all you need to do really is lateral raises, and you could stop Khabib's takedowns for 3 rounds and make him look silly. But Marvin Vettori, it was a very physical style of striking. I really enjoyed it. He was doing things like not just covering Hermansson's lead hand, but there was one where he held Hermansson's wrist, and Hermansson freaked out, threw his right hand, and Vettori slipped it and threw like an uppercut right hook left straight. It was really nice. And then the one he hurt him with in the first round, I can't remember if he knocked him down or just hurt him, but he throws a left straight. He's hand fighting. He throws the left straight, and Hermansson pulls away from it. And instead of bouncing back out of range, he stays there and then throws another jab and gets Hermansson leaning back and comes in with a left straight again. So he really stood on top of him to hit him. But his groundwork looked fantastic. Hermansson kept trying to use the butterfly and the butterfly half guard. Very Danaher influenced guy. So he's trying to get the butterfly half guard to get some control and then kick through to a butterfly guard and start trying to sweep or stand up. Had the underhook from butterfly half and was laying on his side and trying to get up to his post on the other arm. And Vittori was just holding the wrist that was on the floor and pulling it out every time he tried to sit up. And if you watch that fight, every half guard instance, Vittori is holding the bottom wrist all the time. And then Hermansson's takedowns, really nice. Had struggled with doubles and head inside singles, so he started going to the high crotch, which we're always harping on about. I watched BJJ Fanatics just put up a pair of Jake Shields instructionals. Jake Shields, batshit insane as a dude, but as a fighter, pretty cool. You could see videos of him training everywhere. He doesn't care if people film him losing. He's just there with Rafa Mendes one day, he's at AKA the next day, just working hard. And he's always been weird because he's not super athletic as a wrestler, but he does take down very good fighters. And part of it is that high crotch and head outside single, finishing it like he would a single leg, getting guys down to the crackdown, and dudes have a really hard time stopping him. And I was watching his instructional, and he just said it for it was a small detail, but it just blew my fucking mind. He was like, yeah, when I go for the high crotch, I just make sure that my outside shoulder is touching my jaw the entire time. And that's a really stupidly small detail, but it changed my life immediately. Because that's, it just means that when the opponent tries to encircle your head for the arm in guillotine, or the arm out guillotine, whichever, they're having to go over your shoulder as well. And then there's no guillotine. It was fantastic. So the rest of the instruction was pretty good, but that just one tidbit blew my fucking mind. And then, wouldn't you know, I watched this fight with Hermansson and Vittori. Hermansson's outside shoulder is always touching his chin when he's going for the high crotch. Watched Leota Hanayaya, does the same thing. And that's just because I learned it from guys who wrestle and from watching guys who wrestle, and then being like, nice straight back, head upright, you know, and that's perfect for wrestling, but it's not great if the guy's trying to choke you. But Hermansson kept trying to get him down with the high crotch, and Vittori just kept getting up. It was really impressive. I mean, I've described Vittori's striking before as like meat and potatoes, and I think it is. I still think it is. You know, even as I was impressed against Hermansson, it's pretty meat and potatoes. I think one of the things that's quite impressive about him is that even though he hasn't scored a lot of knockouts, and you know, if you look down his record, you wouldn't be like, oh, amazing power puncher. He has made some very good volume strikers like Israel Adesanya and Jack Hermansson slow down a bit and really think about what they're doing. But I think when you're talking about like Kevin Holland, that's quite an interesting matchup because Holland is so, even in middleweight, so tall and so long. Where that Hermansson fight, you know, Hermansson's a fairly lanky dude, but Vittori was just able to stand on top. You know, Vittori looked like 10 pounds, 15 pounds heavier than him when they were in the cage. Just stood on top of him and battered him with left straights and counter punches. I think he's going to have a harder time closing in on Kevin Holland and making him that uncomfortable. I mean, the X factor is always Holland's dog shit takedown defense, but I would be very surprised if Holland stands there and just sort of lets him dominate the lead hand and lets him stand on top of him and wait for counters. Holland typically much better at moving around, using his range and distance. So yeah, I think a lot of people will not care about this because we're not going to see Holland like get a title shot anytime soon. It's not. He hasn't turned it around to the degree that everyone hoped he had. But he's still a very dangerous, tricky fighter. And I think the ways that he's tricky, or the ways in which he is tricky, make him sort of an interesting test for Marvin Vettori, especially on short notice. And then the co-main event is the one that actually matters, the one that I'm really stoked for. It's my boy Sadiq Yusuff versus my other boy Arnold Allen. However, Sadiq Yusuff shouts out the podcast and your boy Slacky J and announces himself as the most black explosive fighter on the planet, and Arnold Allen has never mentioned me. So you get who I'm rooting for here. No, this is a really good fight. Arnold Allen has been out for fucking ever. Like, even before coronavirus, we were going, damn, where's Arnold Allen been? And he also has that thing going on where he's in sort of a Ally Quintus sort of spot, where because the UFC wanted to show you how great this young prospect is, his last two fights are against like old men. You know, he fought Gilbert Melendez in 2019. Gilbert Melendez long since retired. And Nick Lentz in 2020, in January. And in between, he's been teased to be fighting like Jeremy Stevens and Josh Emmett, you know, proper tests for a guy, you know, a young, talented guy. But they just haven't happened. So Sadiq Yusuff, really the best fighter he's fought since Mads Bennell, probably. And don't even get me started on that Mads Bennell fight. But Allen, interesting, because if you watch his early UFC run, you know, who did he fight? Alan Omer, Yatsin Medsa, Makwan Amakani in that split decision, and then Mads Bennell. Highly touted as a striker, but his striking was very sort of... well, I'd say there were large sloppy moments in his striking. When he looked really sharp was against like Gilbert Melendez, but Gilbert Melendez wasn't doing anything. You know, Gilbert Melendez, like recent career, is just sort of standing in front of people and going, uh-oh, low kicks, how do I deal with this? And then being behind the entire fight because he's trying to work out how to check a low kick while the guy's piling up damage on him. So Yusuff, probably the best striker he's fought in a good while too. You know, Mads Bennell, grappler turn striker, really, and boxed him up for 2 rounds. Meanwhile, my boy Sadiq coming off that win over Andre Fili, that was that was also back in January 2020. Dude's just, yeah, this whole thing has really thrown a spanner in the works of a lot of people. But he was booked for Edson Barbosa in October, but had to pull out. So again, like another guy who was like about to step in with the best fight of his career and unfortunately wasn't able to. So this one, you know, the UFC doesn't like to do... Well, actually, sometimes it does, but generally they try not to do two guys in similar positions coming up against each other. Too much, that is. Unless you're like unless you're like an unpopular Brazilian fighter who can't speak English. If you're Leo Santos or Francisco Trinaldo. But, you know, these fights are a real treat. Like the one that we all remember is Conor McGregor versus Max Holloway. But ones where you were like, these guys are going somewhere. Next time these guys meet, one of them could have a title or something like that. You know, it's that sort of feeling. And you love that about a fight. Even though it does sort of, you know, it's kind of rough when you get these prospect versus prospect matches, but it is also what makes MMA such a great sport. One thing I loved about Allen in his last couple was that step-up calf kick he does. Not a lot of guys doing that open stance, lead leg calf kicking, and he's very, very good at it. Gets a lot of snap on it in a short space, and does it quickly. Also has that great left hand to the body. Interesting because he's getting sharper. Like he's tightening up his movements and not like flailing around and running into strikes as much. But that long left hand to the body, like a left uppercut, left hook, whatever you want to call it, but from southpaw, big opening, and then has to sort of pull his head away. I feel like in the grand scheme of his career, that's only going to be good while he's in his sort of physical prime, and then as he starts to slow down, that might get him into some trouble. Very interested to see how his kicking game plays out against Yusuf, because he's got some good body kicks, and that was one that I've seen work quite well against Yusuf in the past, and Fili came in body kicking quite well, and in the second round, Sadiq Yusuf cut kick under his body kick and knocked him to the floor, and then just stood over him so that he lost the entire round, basically. Great way to capitalise on a guy throwing high kicks and body kicks. You know, just make him not want to throw them because he'll lose the rest of the round. Both guys strong grapplers. Yeah, I haven't seen them next to each other, but I've always thought that Allen's fucking massive for that weight class. So I'll be very interested to see how the clinch plays out there. I'd feel Sadiq has the edge on power, and certainly like the loopiness of a lot of Allen's shots makes me think that if Sadiq Yusuf can back him up, make it, you know, corner him, make him step into exchanges, he can probably do some good work with his left hook and his overhand, or his cross counter, whatever you want to call it. I think if you're Allen, probably kicking and takedown attempts are more well suited to box Yusuf out of his best areas. But I don't know. I've been reacquainting myself with both these guys over the last couple of days because they, you know, it seems like it's been forever. And this is just one of those fights that, like, from the moment they announced it, I was like, yes, I'll have one of those, please. So the rest of this card, you got Nina Ansaroff versus Mackenzie Dern. That's quite interesting because that is actually Mum Champ fight. And I think we should refer to it as that and see what happens to Michelle Waterson, because she might just implode with envy. She might just be like, I'm fine, stop asking. But Nina Ansaroff obviously coming back off giving birth to her and Amanda Nunes' is it son or daughter? I can't remember what they've got, but child. And Mackenzie Dern, crazy story because she had a ton of potential because she was a world champion in jiu-jitsu. She came into MMA, seemed to not give a shit. Like, she basically half-assed it. Missed weight by like 20 pounds and immediately walked over to the buffet when she got off the scale. You know, she really turned people against her very quickly. Went away, had a baby. I think most people's reaction was like, well, yeah, that's the end of that. Has the baby, comes back, hasn't missed weight since, boxing looking better, really taking things seriously. So what an inspirational story her little turnaround has been. So it's quite a fun little fight you got here, Ansaroff versus Dern. Not fun enough that we'll consider like the stylistic matchup, but yeah, Dern's quite interesting, like her recent developments. I mean, she could have surpassed this by now, but she was working with Perillo, and she developed this jab, and it was a nice dipping jab, so she could counter people well with it. She could enter well with it, but when she threw her right hand, everything just went to shit. It was like, you know, because the jab is something that comes straight out of your stance. You know, if you master your stance, master that little dip to your right, master the jab coming out, master the stepping in with it. It's a really nice technique because it's not a huge amount of movement. When you throw the right hand, often you've got to make some ground. You've got to square your hips to them. You know, it's just it's a lot more complicated, and it tends to like open you up. And that's what her last fight looked like. She looked great when she was jabbing, but she couldn't do anything off it without looking like, you know, just a mess. You got Julian Marquez taking on the standard bearer of capitalism, Sam Alvey. I don't know when Julian Marquez became a communist, but in this fight he is a communist. And if Sam Alvey wins, I have to move to Texas and stop paying tax. I have to live off elk meat. Jordan Peterson was back in the news this week. And do you remember about 2 years ago, loads of dudes, and it was Rogan and Jordan Peterson did this, but loads of dudes just got into carnivorous diets. And you were like, why? You know, who are you owning? Like, if you're a vegan, you know, sometimes it can be on principle. You know, you don't like eating animals, you don't like animals dying or whatever. If you're a vegetarian, maybe you don't like killing animals. But if you're a carnivore, like, the only reason to be entirely carnivorous and to avoid vegetables is to be like, I'm a lion. You know, like, just, you're not a fucking lion. You're an omnivore. Just eat a bit of everything. You know, it's just insane. And for people like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan to be like, I don't have any nutritional training or scientific background, but I have discovered. Oh. And all these dudes were just like, I'm the healthiest and happiest I've ever been, and then immediately stopped doing it. Because one, really fucking expensive to eat, you know, meat every meal, especially if it's your entire meal. And two, who has the time to take 40-minute dumps? That's what we call Roganomics. It's when you're like, why could every man in the USA not simply live off 3 meals of elk meat a day? But anyway, if Sam Alvey wins, I will consider moving to Texas and eating elk meat every day. Jim Miller versus Joe Selecky. That's a good one, actually, because you've got Jim Miller, old man strength, great grappler, been around forever, tons of finishes, versus Joe Selecky, up-and-comer. I believe he got his black belt from, is it John Salter gave him his black belt? But very strong grappler. And just came off choking my boy, Austin Hubbard. And Austin Hubbard, tricky guy to take down, as we've discussed before. You know, had a good time keeping Davi Ramos off him. And Joe Selecky just took him to the fence, got on his back and choked him in like 3 minutes. And before that beat Matt Wyman in what might have been the fight where Matt Wyman freaked out at the end and was like, let's bang, bro, from the bottom. But I really liked that one. The only, like, the downside of that is I could see Selecky being in a similar position to, like, Charles Oliveira when he fought Jim Miller. Well, fuck, that was like 3 years ago. God, Jim Miller's been on for a long time. But when Charles Oliveira fought Jim Miller the second time, you know, in the first time, Charles Oliveira was the skinny kid and Jim Miller was like the muscled up vet. And in the second time, Charles Oliveira just picked him up. Like, Jim Miller was doing an okay job stopping him from taking him down, and Charles Oliveira just went, well, I'll just lift you off the ground then and walk around you while you're in the air. And, you know, you could get a bit of that here, depending on how, you know, because Joe Selecky's sort of coming into his physical prime. What is he, 27? Yeah, so, you know, still a young guy building into his body, whereas Jim Miller very much winding down in his career, and has Lyme disease, which is even crazier that he keeps going. Scott Holtzman versus Matthias Gamrot is a fun one. Holtzman obviously coming off that loss to Beneil Dariush, but a fun guy, just beat Jim Miller before that, beat Daryl Horcher, one of Khabib's best wins, and he's taking on Matthias Gamrot, who was the KSW champion. Very good fighter, you know, beat Kleber Koika Herbst, beat Mansour Barnui, beat Norman Park, but, you know, we're talking about the good ones. And had a great little match with Gary Tonnen at ADCC, but came into the UFC, lost a split decision to Guram Kutadeladze, whose name I can never say. So he's, yeah, people are like, you know, no one thought he was going to run through this division, but a lot of people felt like he was sort of done badly in that first fight. It's quite cool. If you come in from KSW, people have kind of realistic expectations on you. And then is there anything else good going on? I mean, John McDacey's fighting. Fucking Jorgen De Castro. I know they're phoning in a card when I see Jorgen De Castro. Jack Shaw's back against Hunter Azur. Yeah, that's a good fight, actually. Hunter Azur was doing some interesting karate boxing in his last one, or the one before, whichever one. Lots of, like, slapping lead hooks into big uppercuts off the rear hand and stuff, and then darting out the side door. Jack Shaw, obviously 13-0 undefeated. Welsh wrestling, whatever that is, but it's impressed me so far. If it's a real martial art or a real like lineage of something, then very cool. Oh, Mike Perry's on the card, so, you know, you'll get some insanity regardless. And then elsewhere this weekend, well, I mean today, later today, or rather like 3 a.m. in the morning, because one's doing something weird with its timings now. If you're in Asia, put your fights on at Croissant O'Clock in England. Thanks. But they've got DJ fighting their guy, Adriano, what's his name? Fuck, hold on. Adriano Moraes, who hasn't fought in like 2 years, is 1-1 back to 2017. It's really like, standard. But he has the belt for some reason, and Demetrius Johnson's fighting for it as the challenger. At this point, I think it's safe to say Demetrius Johnson lost a step. It's not that one's flyweight division is amazing. There's guys like Danny Kingad who can't wrestle doing fine in that division. I mean, I like Yuya Wakamatsu, and I like WADA. DJ has been WADA tested by that lad, but they're not better than a lot of these top end flyweights in the UFC. It's just that DJ seems to be slowing down, which was always going to happen eventually. It happens to every fighter, no matter how good they are, no matter how much you want them to be better than the aging process. Most of them slow down. However, this should be a cakewalk for DJ. Do expect everyone to only watch this fight and then say, wow, those flyweights in one, they've got a very strong flyweight division. But you've also got Eddie Alvarez versus Yuri Lepicus, who did okay against Christian Lee, but ultimately lost quite quickly. I think, if Eddie decides to wrestle him, it should have no trouble at all. But it's Eddie Alvarez. He, even in his prime, he was getting dropped at the start of every fight before he really got going. It means that guys like the Patricky Pitbull, who really didn't come anywhere close to winning that fight, can be like, well, I did have him hurt as much as anyone's ever hurt him. And then Rod Tang's fighting because Rod Tang fights every other weekend. And then Rug, Umar Kane, is fighting Patrick Smith. He had an opponent before. He had Buchecha, and Buchecha ran for the hills. He called for Vitor Belfort, and Vitor Belfort was like, no, I'm having none of that, thanks. So they had him an opponent. The opponent pulled out mysteriously, and they put him in with a kickboxer who was planning to kickbox that night. So, yeah, if you want to watch Rug just rugdoll someone, that's the fight for you. Oh, and there's also a Bellator card, which really is a strange one. Co-main event Liz Carmouche, Kat Zingano versus a 4-1 opponent. Goiti Yamauchi is on the card. He was quite promising until he realised that he didn't really know how to wall walk. He just sort of tried to play guard, which was one of the easiest wins of Michael Chandler's career. Chandler came out, couldn't knock him out in the first round, got tired, just took him down next to the fence and laid on him. If you want to be bored by a Michael Chandler fight, I recommend that one and the rematch with Brent Primus. But the main event is Ryan Bader versus Leota Machida, a matchup 10 years in the making? I don't know. But if you look at this poster, it looks like someone's put their faces through the aging app. It's incredible. I mean, Leota Machida literally looks like his dad. And Ryan Bader, I don't know when he fucking got old, but he is. His unbelievable old man look on his face. Now, the first match was lost by Ryan Bader losing patience and just trying to run to close the distance. Hopefully, he's got a little bit better since then. Machida's the underdog here. He is ancient, but he has been, he's been doing surprisingly well recently because guys have been, afraid to just get in his face and do what Derek Brunson did, run at him, or just, close him down and knock him out with speed and power advantage over the old man whose chin has sort of gone. But, Leota Machida, if the judges weren't bought and paid for, he'd be the Bellator middleweight champion right now. He beat Rafael Carvalho by split decision. He knocked out Chael Sonnen by flying knee. Lost a split decision to Gegard Mousasi when Mousasi ran from him. And then lost a split decision to Phil Davis because he's actually pretty good at stopping takedowns. And Phil Davis will just throw step-up kicks from miles away on the feet. So actually quite interesting because Ryan Bader, in Bellator, he has been relying on his wrestling a lot. That weird, level change left hook that he caught Fedor and a few others with is money, but still relies heavily on his wrestling. And Machida has a really quite unshakable base most of the time. It was always a thing we were going is that the sumo? In the first match with Phil Davis, he knees Phil Davis coming in. Phil Davis drops on a takedown, and he just pulls him up off his legs, in the middle of the ring while he's walking backwards. It's really impressive. Machida, hard lad to take down. Anyway, I hope Machida pulls it off because I love Leota Machida, but I'm not super invested. Oh, sorry, I did. I'm actually monetarily invested. I put £2 on all the favourites, and I put £1 on Machida anyway because I could see Bader blowing up in this one, and Machida was 3-1. Anyway, I think that'll do us for today. I managed to get motivated for these fights, even though they aren't amazing, and. yeah, let's bounce back into it. I'll have something coming later in the week for the Patreon boys. Been churning them out, and it's all been quite interesting stuff in the last couple of weeks. Well, what am I talking about? If there's not anything interesting to write about, I don't write. I'm not going to waste your time with boring shit. But yeah, I'll have something good coming for the Patreon boys. If you want to get in on the extra stuff we do for the patrons, sign up to the Patreon, become a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Marvin Vettori growing his beautiful Aryan hair back, bless.